Grief is something we will all unfortunately have to experience at some point in our lives. Most of us will experience it multiple times. It's something that no one can prepare you for. And on today's episode, you will hear the experience of Elizabeth Tucker, how she was able to heal and find joy again after tragically losing her husband, Blake Snyder, in the line of duty in 2016. At the time of his death, Elizabeth and Blake had a 2-year-old son together. After overcoming such trauma and loss, Elizabeth was able to slowly start to rebuild her life again. She eventually met her now husband, Jacob, and they now have a family of 5. Elizabeth and Jacob own and operate an athletic performance facility where they train young athletes. On top of that, she also makes it her personal mission to help others navigate their grief and once again see the light at the end of the trauma tunnel. In her short 32 years on this earth, she has learned countless lessons about life and cherishing every moment that she's given. Lessons she hopes to continue sharing with others in their moments of uncertainty. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Elizabeth Tucker to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on and being here. I've been looking so forward to the show, and I'm so excited to have you in studio.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah,
Yay.
and especially because we're both in like a climate shock right now.
Oh my gosh, I know. Like 86 degrees yesterday, and now it's what, 26? I left the house at 26. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yes, I got out of my car when I got here, and I was like, oh my gosh, I hope I have my winter coat in here because it is freezing.
Yeah, it's like this is Midwest weather. That's exactly what it is, like constantly. And my son, he's like having like shock in his like sinuses. He doesn't do well with the weather like that. So when it changes so suddenly, like his face will like blow up with allergies.
Oh,
it's
no.
very sad, but
I feel his pain though, because
Yeah.
I feel like when it does get like this, I am like stuffed up and just my eyes are watering all the time.
Your body just doesn't know how to handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so thank you for coming in this treacherous weather.
Absolutely.
And I'm really excited, happy you're here. And I want to start off by saying that this show is obviously centered around grief. And grief is definitely a touchy subject. So I don't want to undermine that one bit. Unfortunately, myself, I experienced grief recently, and that led me to wanting to have a show on the subject because I feel like grief is like you're on a boat in an ocean and you just have constant waves coming at you, and
100%.
you don't know when they're coming, but they come, and it's sometimes really hard to deal with. And
some of those waves are little and some waves are bigger than the other ones. So yeah, I totally get that.
Absolutely. And so when I started following you on social media and just learned about your story, I was like, I have to reach out to have you on because I feel like you are such an amazing advocate for people going through grief.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm so thrilled you said yes and you're here.
Yes, I'm trying anyway. I'm trying to be that. So
yes. Well, you're doing an amazing job of it.
Well, thanks.
So with that being said, this is going to be a little bit heavier show than normal. And rather than just dive right in, I want to kind of take it a little lighter and just have you tell the audience, about yourself and a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, my name's Elizabeth. I grew up in a little small town in Granite City, Illinois, so right across the river from St. Louis.
Fellow Illinois girl here.
Yeah, where are you from in Illinois then?
Highland.
Oh my gosh,
Highland area.
Stop. Okay, yeah. So all of our basketball games and football games, we played Highland.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great. Funny.
Yeah.
I grew up in Granite City in a family of 5. I'm one of 5 siblings, so I'm the 4th out of 5. Yeah, big family. It was really fun actually having 4 siblings because it was just loud and chaotic and crazy at my house at all times, but really fun. My dad was a cop in Granite City for 30 years, and my mom was the CEO of a pregnancy center there, still is she's going on like 40 years now, so long time. But yeah, that's where I grew up. What else do you want to know about me, little old me in my youngin' age?
So so you grew up like in a officer household, so that's something that you've been used to your whole life.
Yeah. My dad being a cop was really kind of an identity that my entire family had. Everybody knew us in Granite City. My dad knew everybody, but everybody knew him as a cop, you know? And being the child of a cop, I didn't date many brave guys, you know? You had to be really brave to date me. My dad was a hard, tough cop, and
I've always wondered how that's gone for friends of mine that their dads were cops. I'm like, ooh, how's your dating life going?
He scared a few people off, and I'm sure he did that purposely sometimes, but it was really fun. I thought he had such a cool job. I thought he was so cool. His uniform, his gun, his nightstick, and his cop car was so cool. Having it out there was really fun. And then my brother, he's the second of all the 5 kids. He grew up and he decided to follow in my dad's footsteps and become a cop too. So he was a police officer for about 15 years before leaving the department and becoming a state rep for Missouri. So he did it for a really long time. And then my uncle, my mom's brother, wanted to be a cop as well, and he's been a cop for 30-something years as well. So just family full of cops.
So yeah, I was gonna say you are like fully immersed.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. Cop life, I know it very well.
So then growing up, were you ever what was your idea on being in a relationship with a cop growing up?
Honestly, and when I was younger, it never crossed my mind. I don't know. Yeah. I never thought I'd like to date a cop, or I'd like to be a cop, or I'd like to be married to a cop, because I only really knew it as being the child of a police officer. It's a very different dynamic being the child versus being the wife, which eventually I would come to learn and know very well. But I don't know. I never really thought about it until my husband Blake decided he wanted to get into the academy. So, and then it was just a whole different world.
Did your brother and your dad kind of give him a little incentive of make him want to go into the academy, or?
So Blake was he got his degree in architecture. So he was doing web design and for our church. That's where I met him. He was doing web design and a lot of the marketing stuff for the church. So he was very artsy in that way. So I never really thought that he would want to be in that realm until one day he told me, he's like, I just love hearing all of your dad's stories and Justin's stories, and I think that I might want to enroll in the academy. It was about the cutoff age for him. So he's like, it's at now or never.
Oh, I actually did not know that there was a cutoff age. But
back then there was.
Okay.
I don't know if it's changed, but it was. I think it was 29. You had to be unless you were in another department before that.
Oh, okay.
But he had not done anything law enforcement related, and there was a cutoff. So he's like, it's now or never. So yeah. I told him, I was like, maybe you should talk to my dad and Justin about it first. And he did. And they gave him advice you should try anything else first, because this is a hard job. And the only ones that can do it are the ones that are called to do it. So you need to really pray about it. You need to really think about it, and then make your decision. And he did. He thought about it for 0.7 seconds because he knew he already wanted to do it. And then, yeah, he enrolled, and we were engaged at that time whenever he graduated from the academy with St. Louis County. So, yeah.
Wow. And so, yeah, what a contrast, which means clearly he was called to do this work, because
it was a complete lifestyle change. Yeah. Very, very different. It really changed him even from the beginning. He started to blossom, I want to say, because it just it opened his personality. He already was a really caring and thoughtful guy before that, but I feel like becoming a police officer widened his scope of wanting to help others, and that's what police officers are there to do. They're there to help others. So,
right.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So this is really surreal that you're sitting here right now, and I'll tell you why. Okay. And I wanted to save this for the episode, so I have not told you this yet.
Okay.
But when I reached out to you to be on this podcast and everything, and I knew what I wanted to have you on about, and I had been following your story on social media, and so I knew that you tragically lost your husband in the line of duty, right. That you remarried and are now living with your new husband with your 3 children and just doing amazing. everything. And also, like I said, helping others who are going through, tragic loss and grief and everything.
Yeah.
And so I knew I wanted to have you on. And so that's why I reached out. And then once you were like, yeah, and I was super excited, and I started doing some more research and prepping for the show, I quickly realized, like, it just all hit me at once, who you are and who your husband was.
Okay.
And which I thought was crazy, because I was so connected to your story when this happened.
Really?
And
wow.
I remember it coming out and reading the headline. I want to say it was an email that, like, I always get like the Post-Dispatch emails or something. And I remember the story coming out, and I like, my heart was like in my stomach. I was like, oh my gosh. And the reason why is because I just got married like right before this. Okay. And I also had a 2-year-old son.
So it really
our sons
resonated
are the same
with
age.
you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I remember saying this and just was like, oh my God, trying to put myself in your shoes. And I was just like heartbroken over it for you and for your family and just everything. And so to have you in here was like so surreal, because when I made the connection, I was like, oh my gosh.
Isn't that crazy what social media
really
can do nowadays? Like, it can connect you in ways that you didn't even think possible.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes. And when I told my husband, even he was like, oh my gosh, because he remembers, because we were just both sitting there just like heartbroken, like I said, for you and your family and everything. And I remember, staying up on the story and everything. So
thank you.
To see you sitting here today and just doing great is amazing to see. And
I've come a long way.
Yes.
And my son, we have both made large steps in our grief journey. And I can't like ever be thankful or grateful or appreciative enough of everyone who supported us then and support us now. And just like you said, our story resonated with a lot of people around the area, because there are a lot of people that put themselves in our shoes and could relate in some way. And I just love seeing the fruit of that. And now we get to talk, 7.5 years later about it, and hopefully help others in maybe similar situations or even just coping with any kind of loss that they're dealing with. So
oh, absolutely.
Comes full circle.
Yes, it does. And it's great. I mean, to have you here. So, that being said, I want to just kind of like dive right in and have you, tell your story for those who may not know it, may not be local to St. Louis. Because I mean, if you were around in 2016, I'm sure you heard of the story, especially if you were watching the news in that time. And so if you can just explain, your experience of that loss.
Sure. So Blake and I had been married for 3 years at that point, and he was a police officer for St. Louis County. He was just a beat cop, so he was just a patrol officer. He worked nights. I was full-time in school and working part-time, and we had a 2-year-old son. So our schedules were kind of crazy. But he was working nights, and it was just very routine, regular, night. He said, love you, bye, gave me a kiss, gave Malachi a kiss, and left. And it was very, very routine. And I put Kai to bed. I went to bed. And then I got a call at 5 a.m. from my brother, who was also a police officer at the time. He was on the TAC team. And he said, you need to get ready, Elizabeth. It's something happened to Blake, and I need you to get up. He's been shot. And it didn't really register at that point in time. You're waking up at 5 a.m. You're like, what? What's going on? He just said he was coming to get me.
And this is the last thing you're expecting to hear on the phone.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, okay. And I got off the phone very quickly, and I started getting ready. And, as I'm figuring it out, I'm like, what happened? I call him back. I'm like, what do you mean he was shot? What's going on? And he's just like, I just need you to get ready. And he's been shot, and I'm picking you up, and we're taking you to the hospital. But come to find out, Blake had gone to a call. He was almost off work. It was the end of his shift, and a call came out for actually his coworker, Johnny, and it was just for this young man who was like harassing his ex-girlfriend at her house, at her mother's house, and the cops got called. And they had dealt with this guy before. So Blake was like, I'll go. I'm really close. Like, I'll beat you there, Johnny, I'll go first. And they said, fine. And he shows up, and the guy had already gone out to his car and was sitting in his car outside of the house. And as soon as Blake gets out, he's thinking this. I'm sure he's thinking this is very routine. He's worked with this guy before, and he starts walking up, and the guy just out of nowhere hops out of his car and shoots him, and it was immediate. He was gone right then. And as this is happening, Johnny, his partner, is pulling up, so he sees the whole thing, and he hops out and he shoots the suspect. He shoots him 7 or 8 times, and he miraculously survives it. But you know, I got that call, and I didn't really know what happened until I actually got to the hospital. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we don't have to get into details, but in summary, it was the worst day of my life, obviously. You know, in like a heartbeat, I lost my husband, my spouse, my best friend, the father of my son, and Malachi had just lost his father, you know, like it was just so traumatic. It was an awful, awful experience. Something I wish no one had to go through, obviously. So that was the day of. And afterwards, like, obviously, just the whole week, that day and then that whole week is just a complete blur. Like, I have memories here and there, and it's just your body totally takes over, your brain totally takes over. You go into shock, you go through so many motions. And before that, I had never really realized that your body can go through so many things and really, like a machine, take over, you know, and that's what happened. So that was the beginning of my grief journey.
You lost your dad at 21?
Yeah, right. When I was 21, my dad passed away from cancer.
Okay.
He had been a police officer for a long time. He had retired, and he was doing like security jobs after that. But then he had cancer twice. The first time they were able to get it, and he went into remission, and then it came back about 6-7 years later, and they weren't able to get it. So he eventually passed when I was 21, and that was 6 months before Blake and I got married. So that was like,
oh wow,
awful. You know,
so this is your first experience of grief.
Yes,
is losing your father.
Yes,
and
yes.
Wow. Okay.
And up to that point, that was the worst I had ever felt, and the most amount of grief or sadness I had ever felt. And that was awful. But it's different whenever you lose your spouse. It's
absolutely.
It's two totally different forms of grief and loss and trauma. So I still wasn't even, that didn't even prepare me for losing Blake, you know? It's just awful. So yeah.
So, and I know you said like everything was a blur, and so that leads me to my next question, which is, after the hospital, you know, what your life kind of looked like in those next moments of just navigating the next steps leading up to the funeral. Obviously, you had a 2-year-old that you still had to be a mom for and try and be strong for, but your entire world is broken at this point.
Yeah.
And so what did that look like at that time for you?
I felt very, even though I wasn't alone, I had so many people around me, so much support. I felt very alone. I felt alone in what I was feeling. I felt confused. My biggest, I think, emotion was confusion. I was just confused. Why is this happening? Why my life? Why my husband? You know, why my son? It was just a bunch of whys, and I don't understand. And not that I was ever suicidal or anything, but I just didn't want to be here. Like I just had no drive anymore to be here. I wasn't eating, I wasn't drinking, not purposely. I just, when your body experiences that level of trauma and pain, you're just there. That you're just existing, and you don't, I didn't feel like I wanted to exist anymore. And the only thing that was pushing me to the next step was Malachi, was having him and having to be his mom. And everything with him was normal and fine, and I was able to take care of him in the ways that I should. I just wasn't able to take care of myself in the ways that I should in that moment, you know, for those first few weeks, really. So thankfully I had a good support system, and people were helping me, and I was figuring things out. But when I lost Blake, I didn't know what I was going to do in the next 10 minutes, much less what am I going to do with the rest of my life, you know? Blake took care of all of the bills. He took care of anything adult related, you know? I had never lived outside of my home until I got married. So I went right from living with my parents and them doing pretty much everything to moving in with Blake, and he was doing everything. So I had to become an adult and mature up real fast, you know, and it took a lot of learning. It took a lot of patience and prayer, but I made it, thankfully.
Yeah, that was what another question of mine was, did you waver in faith? Like, did this experience almost for that, week right after, like the days after, did it make you question your faith and just kind of like the world's not making sense at the moment, like you said, and you're just kind of like, what is the point? Like, what is this? Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to us?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I questioned my faith because I still believed the same core foundation that I had always believed. I was just more confused. Like that was my main thing. I kept asking God, like, why did you allow this to happen to us?
Mm-hmm.
Why Blake? He was a wonderful person. He could have done so many more wonderful things in life. Instead, you had to allow him to be taken, and I don't know why. I felt like I was a really good prayer warrior for you. I felt like I had a very deep relationship with you, and I don't know why you allowed this to happen to me. And that was my big thing when it came to God. And it took me a long time to get back on a friend basis with God, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense.
I wasn't angry at him very much. I had a moment of anger. Obviously, everybody has a moment of anger, but you're not supposed to be angry with God for too long. And I wasn't really angry. I was just confused, and I was sad, and I was hurt, and I felt almost betrayed because I felt like I was such a good Christian. I was such a good follower, a believer. And it just took me a while to get back on that friend to friend basis with him.
Yeah, all valid for sure. Because I feel like everyone, when going through grief, I think that's a wave that you come across.
Yeah,
I really do.
100%.
And I think you handle it well. I mean, in staying strong in your faith. I think that's something that probably, would you say, helped you maybe in healing because you didn't let that waver. You were still
100%. If anything, it made me stronger. I found myself diving deeper into the word and praying more often, but it was just like a half and half. Like I went to God for help, but at the same time I was confused and I was upset at him for allowing this to happen. So it just took a long time of continuing to pray and to read the word and dive into the word and journal and just work on my inner heart and my inner core system to be able to get to the next step. And that was a conscious choice. I had to choose to continue to keep moving forward instead of allowing myself to stay in a spot of despair, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people hold on to their bitterness, hold on to their sadness and anger, and it keeps them in a very, very dark place. It keeps them in a very sad and despondent place of hopelessness. And the only way you get out of that is that you choose, I am not going to stay here. I'm not going to keep being in the same place in my mind and in my heart. I have to consciously choose, I am going to be happy again. I am going to love again. I am going to find the happiness and light at the end of this tunnel. I am going to make it. Like, you have to tell yourself, like, audibly, I am going to make it. Otherwise, you're going to stay in that same spot.
Yeah. Yes. And so that actually leads me to my next question, which is talking about, did you go through moments of regret? Did you have any regrets? Did you have anger towards a person or something in particular?
Of course I had regrets. I think anybody that loses someone, you have some kind of regret, whether it's on a big level or a small level. I mean, Blake and I were in an argument the night that he died. So that's a huge regret. Like, I'm very regretful that I was being such a baby. Like, we were just arguing about his schedule. I was frustrated with his schedule because I felt like I wasn't seeing him. I felt like we weren't spending enough time as a family with Malachi because he was gone a lot, or I was gone because I was working all day. But I look back at it and I probably could have made some different choices that night about how I talked to him and how I responded. And you're always going to have regrets. You're always going to be like, I should have changed this. I should have done this. I should have said that. But that's how you learn. And that's how I've learned in my next relationship, in my current relationship. There are things that I will not allow to happen now that I did allow to happen with Blake. And I've learned that I'm not going to let Jacob leave the house without being on a good note. Like, I don't care how big of a fight or how small of a fight. He's not allowed to leave the house. I'm not allowed to leave the house on a bad note. It's just, it's a non-negotiable in our house. And I said, I know that sounds like big, you know, like, oh, there's no way you do that every time. No, there is.
Yeah.
Like, you have to make a choice. Once again, you don't allow him to leave on a bad note. You work it out. Take 30 seconds to figure out what you're going to say, but don't allow him to leave. And that was one of my regrets with the situation with Blake. And as far as having anger towards anyone, you know, you would think that a person in this situation would have a lot of anger towards the person who killed him and took him from us. And of course I was angry at him. Like, how can you not be angry about what happened?
Oh, 100%.
But for me, it was more of, this guy was a young guy. I think he had just turned 18 when it happened. So he was young. And I remember where my mindset was when I was 18. I was very immature, not giving him an excuse, but you also have a lot of life that you haven't lived yet at that age. And, you know, he was all kinds of in bad places in his life. But in my mind, I was thinking I wasn't directing anger at him because this was all out of my control, and he did what he did, and being angry at him isn't going to change what happened, you know?
And like you said, it keeps you in that place.
Yeah.
That you were talking about earlier.
Right. And so that was always kind of my mindset on it. Did I think it was okay, or did I choose to forgive him at that moment? No. It took a couple years, almost 3 years, for me to really be in a place where I could 100% not have any kind of feelings towards him at all. You know, whether that was feelings of anger or harsh feelings, anything like that. It took a while. You know,
you had to work it through. I'm sure.
Pray about
that's
it.
A lot to work. That's a lot to work through.
Heavily, you know.
Yeah.
But I wasn't able to forgive him until the trial, and you would think, because during a trial, I mean, I saw everything, like all of the autopsy pictures. I heard all of the horrible details of my husband's death and my husband's murder. And you would think that would make me angrier. But honestly, it made me pity him. It made me sad for him. You know, his family got up and they were witnesses for his side. And I heard a lot of things that happened in his life, and I felt really sad for him and sorry for him. Not that it gave him an excuse. Because there is no excuse for that, but it did make me sorry for him, and it really pushed me to want him to have a relationship with Christ, because the only way that you can get out of that type of life and living that he was living at the moment that he killed Blake is Jesus, a relationship with Christ. And it just, I felt like that was my moment in my heart that God was telling me, like, you just need to forgive him. You need to choose to let it go. Otherwise, it's going to drag you down. It's going to keep you in that dark place. And if you don't, it's not going to be good, you know? So I had to consciously choose, like, I'm letting this go. I'm letting this out of my heart. I'm letting this off my shoulders. I want that freedom that forgiveness gives you, and I want that peace that forgiveness gives you. So I chose to give it.
So it wasn't until the trial, like the day of the trial, that you finally decided to forgive?
Yeah, I don't think I had said it to myself or thought about the actual act of forgiving him until that point. And after he was convicted, like, we were able to give our victim impact statements. And I went last out of several other people, you know, Blake's mom, dad, Johnny, all of them. And I was listening to a lot of them get up and give their statements. And the majority of the statements were angry because obviously
Rightly
they're angry.
so.
You know, they're like, I hope you rot in hell. Like, I hope you never have a happy moment in your life again. All these really understandably harsh statements. But I also didn't want to be that person, because I feel like the best way to emulate who Blake was and who God is was to represent Christ when I got up there. So I didn't have a written out statement. I didn't really have a thought process on what I was going to say. And I totally just prayed about it before. And I said, God, you know what? Whatever you want me to say, help me say it. And that's all I'm going to do. So I got up there and it kind of just like came off my lips. Like it just came out of my mouth. And I told the judge, we weren't able to directly speak to the defendant. Like we weren't able to be like, I hate you. You had to like direct it to the judge, if that makes sense. So I had to be like,
I heard you talk about that and I was wondering why that was, or if you knew.
This was such a high profile case in St. Louis and really around the country at the time. And it was still during a time period where police officers were the focus of a lot of hatred and judgment. And the judge didn't want anything affecting the trial or her sentencing or anything like that. And I know that sounds kind of funky, but she just said, you can't address him, so address me. So how I had to talk to him was saying, I want him to know. Like, I couldn't look him, so I had to say, I want him to. Yeah, he was right there. Yeah. Like, I just couldn't look at him and say, I hate you. Like, that was what it was. It was more of, I want him to know this is how I feel or whatever. Yeah. So I told her, I said, I want him to know, like, this was my main sentence. I want him to know that not only do I forgive him for what he's done, but Blake forgave him the moment it happened, and God has already forgiven him as well. And, I mean, it was like you could hear a pin drop in the room, and then there were gasps from people, and they were just like, oh, she forgave him up on the stand because everybody else had just said, I hate you. Like, you stole this from me.
And they're expecting from his wife to hear
I think that's what
something 10x.
Yeah, I definitely think that's what was expected, and it was the opposite. But that's how I felt, and that's what I felt like God told me to say. And I'm telling you, the weight that was lifted off my shoulder when I was able to audibly say that to him, it was just so freeing.
That's powerful.
It was wonderful, and I felt so good afterwards. I can't really explain it more than that. I just felt really good and free after it. And he got up there because he was allowed to make a statement as well, and he just said, he's like, I know a lot of you in this room, like, hate me and have said really nasty things, but there was one person that really didn't say anything nasty, and I appreciate that person. So I mean, at least he got it and he heard it, and that was the point.
And maybe that changed his trajectory into finding Christ.
You know what, that's the goal.
Hoped.
I hope so. I did say that as well. I was like, I really hope that you have a revival moment with Jesus and that you have a relationship with him. Because I did say that. I said, because if you have that moment with Jesus and you find Christ, then you'll know what you did, and when you get to heaven, Blake's gonna embrace you. And I said that, and I'm gonna cry right now.
I have chills again. Oh my gosh.
Because that's who Blake was. Blake was very firm in his beliefs. He was sharing Jesus with people when he went on calls. I've heard so many good stories from his life afterwards of people that he went to a call, or people that were affected from his funeral and his death, just like you were affected through the screen and you didn't even know us, you know?
It definitely changed. And actually at the time, obviously I didn't know the story about, the argument that you had before he left, and that is one thing that you would change, and you've changed it in your marriage now, and not ever letting him leave in an argument. And actually, of course I didn't know all that back then, but just your story, actually, we changed that in our marriage. I never, we always try to like smooth things over before he leaves.
Perfect, obviously,
yeah, obviously.
Not on the note that you were fighting it.
Always kiss him goodbye. Always give him a hug goodbye. Not like, ugh, screw you, leave. I'm mad at you. Because you don't know if that is the last time you will see that person.
I know. Yeah. A lot of people don't think about it, and I didn't think about it before Blake left. Like, I had a completely different mindset beforehand, like, oh, it's not going to happen to me, me, that doesn't happen over here, like, and if anything, it would happen to my brother because he's on the tag team, so he had like a much more dangerous position within the county. That's our family always thought if something was going to happen, it was going to happen to Justin, but it didn't, and we weren't prepared for it. So I do believe that I've learned so many lessons from my relationship with Blake, from losing him, that have made me into a more mature person, a better wife, a better mother. My life has completely changed from losing him. And I say it's from the loss, and it is from the loss, but it's also from searching out within myself who I am and how I deal with these things, and it really has changed who I am at the core. So I'm not the Elizabeth I was before Blake passed.
And so because of that, do you feel like you are now able to, when this all first happened, you were like, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to us? Are you able to now say, this happened for me, this happened for us? Do you think is that a feeling that you have, or that this was supposed to be for like a purpose?
I do think there was a purpose behind it. I've gotten comments over the years saying, how could you believe in a God that would take your husband from you? And I don't believe God took him from me. I think that he allowed him to be taken. God doesn't kill us off. He allows things to happen so that lessons can be learned, so that other things can happen in our lives that teach us things and either help us, or you know what I'm saying. And I don't think I'll ever know if that makes sense, why, completely why. But I have seen the fruits of his life and his death within my life, within strangers' lives. I've heard so many stories from people over the years. I continue to hear them about how he affected them, whether he was alive or whether he's been gone. So I do believe that things happen for a reason, and his life brought a lot of people comfort in ways, and brought a lot of people to Christ. And a lot of people, I can't count the amount of people that have messaged me and said, you know what, I saw his funeral, and on the TV, I saw his funeral, and it was just so touching, and I heard the songs that were played at the church, and I started to go to church again, and I have reignited my fire that I had for God 20 years ago, and now it's reignited. It's just things like that that I do believe were the purpose behind it, because maybe that person would still be in the same position they were before if Blake was still alive. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Because they weren't forced to think about, I need to go back to church, or I need to talk to God again. I need to have a relationship with him, So I have seen the fruits.
Well, I can tell you, sitting here just with you today, and then also listening to the interview that you did on the 1078 Project, it brought me to tears multiple times. So for any listeners, if you want to hear more in depth of Elizabeth's story and Blake's story, definitely go listen to that podcast.
It's a heavy one.
Yeah, it's
just
called the 1078 Project.
It's very detailed.
Yes. Yeah. But it had me in tears multiple times, listening just to everything. But what I was getting at with that, though, is that being in here with you and listening to that podcast and his story and just everything, it made me want to become closer with Christ.
Oh,
and
I love to hear that.
It definitely made me want to strengthen my faith a little bit more. And, because I really do, like, sitting here and, I think you fully embody faith and Christianity, and I love that. And I really think because of that, you're really making a difference in the world. And I think, like you said, Blake did as well in life and in death. Yeah. And I love that. I love the positivity of that.
I hope so. I feel like, I have a platform on social media and within the St. Louis community. And I feel like why I've been given it is so that I can help other people in my position. I'll get a message here and there that people will just give me their whole life story and what they're going through, and they're, asking for advice. And I love that because I get to give them a little bit of my snippet of knowledge that I have learned over the last 7.5 years. And I'm not perfect, and I'm not the big old wise owl, but I do feel like I can help someone in that tiny little way, and I'm thankful to be able to do it.
You do have a lot of wisdom. I
don't think I'm a really wise person. I've just learned a lot in the last 7 years, so I'm trying.
And you do exude like a comfort, so I think that people probably feel that through social media. And
I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. So that leads me to your healing journey. How long after Blake's death would you say that it was till you feel you were like ready to heal and started healing?
Well, for every person, this is different. And so if you listen to my healing journey, it's going to be completely different than Susie Q over here. Mm-hmm. And I've learned talking to a lot of other widows over the years that no healing journey is the same. One person can feel like they're healing 3 months afterwards. One person doesn't ever feel like they can heal, or one person takes 20 years and all of a sudden it pops off in their brain. Oh, I can be better now.
Yeah.
So it's just different for each person. For me personally, I feel like the first year afterwards, I was still crying like every day. And then after the year, it was probably like every other day. And then it turned into twice a week. And then eventually turned into once a week. You know, it just slowly started to get better and better in my I should say, willingness to be happy again. Because I had to keep making that choice every single day, every day that I woke up. Okay, I can make it through this day. You know, there are going to be happy things that happen to me today. Malachi has a soccer game. That's going to be great. I can't wait to enjoy it. Instead of dwelling on, I'm alone at his soccer game. You know, I'm by myself. Blake's not here. Like, there's things that you have to tell yourself in your brain to continue moving forward so that you can heal healthy and happy and be joyful again. And for me, it did take some time. And like you said, the waves, they still come. They just get a little bit different each time. And one wave, you know, this one could be really big, or a trigger. Mm-hmm. Like, it took me a long time to even watch a movie that had anything to do with cops. Like, even if it was positive, negative, sad, not sad, like, I couldn't watch any kind of movie. Jacob and I went and saw a movie, I want to say a couple years ago, and it had, I didn't know, an officer get shot. And I was like, nope. And we got up out of the theater, and I left, and I like had a complete panic attack. It was just little things like that are triggering, you know, and that caused a really huge wave.
Yourself can put you deep into a negative space, I'm sure.
Yeah, 100%. And my triggers could be completely different than someone else's triggers. You know, I'm really big on location in my life, meaning I still, like, to this day can't drive past the arch without thinking about the day Blake proposed to me, because he proposed underneath the arch. And so it's really, really hard for me to even look at it still without being completely sad. So, and then there's other people that, you know, location doesn't matter. It's more of like, oh, that necklace he got me, or something like that. It's just different for each person. So
I know for some people it's songs will come on, and it's just,
Yes, 100% songs too. I still can't listen to the songs we played at his funeral, because it's like, it sends you right back to that moment, you know? But yeah, it's taken some time, but I'm on my own little path. You know, it's not the same as anyone else's, but eventually I was able to be happy again after making the choice to be happy again, you know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I want to talk briefly about your son. And, you know, because like I said, I recently experienced grief and loving a loved one passing.
I'm sorry.
And thank you. And I'm also sorry for you. But my son was, I want to say 7, and my daughter was 4, or they were almost 7 and almost 4. When this happened, and they were very close to this family member as well. And so it was really hard for me to, you know, once I processed through my grief, was like, okay, you know, they're asking questions. I need to explain something to them.
Talk about it.
But when, you know, they're young, how do you do that? And so I can't even imagine having to explain that to my child about their own father. So with that being said, how did you go about that to your son, and at what age did you decide to finally explain things to him?
So Malachi was 2 when this happened, and I don't know about you, but I don't have any memories from when I was 2. I can't remember anything.
Hardly,
you know, when I was 2. So really it was a positive and a negative that he was 2 when this happened, because positive, he didn't have to experience the grief like I experienced it, or my family, or, you know, Blake's parents. He didn't have to feel that loss at that moment and how excruciating it was. The negative is that 2 on, he has no like memories of Blake. You know, he's not going to remember him. Maybe he will. That would be amazing if he did, but doubtful. So really, he's only going to know anything about Blake from what I tell him or family tells him or what he reads about or sees, you know? So it's a positive and negative. But when it happened, you know, all I told him, because he couldn't understand his 2-year-old brain, you don't really get it, you know. I just said, you know, Daddy went to heaven, and he was like, you know, okay.
Yeah.
So he didn't really get it. He just knew that Blake wasn't around anymore, and he would ask about him, and he would ask where he was, and I would just have to be like, he went to heaven. Remember, he went to heaven. And it wasn't for years afterwards. I want to say he didn't really get it till maybe he was 7,
Yeah, right
8-ish. Up until that time, up until he was 7, I did my best to shield him from what had happened.
Mm-hmm.
And he would ask questions from time to time because he had cousins that would talk about it. He had, you know, aunts and uncles that would talk about it. He would just be like, I don't understand what happened or whatever. But it wasn't until he was about 7 that he actually, like, it clicked in his brain one day. He goes to all of the police events with me. I go to the memorial breakfasts, and Blake's face is everywhere within the department. You know, they have their fallen officer pictures everywhere, and everybody still talks about him. So at the memorial breakfast when he was 7 is whenever he had a moment. They were talking about the fallen officers. It's a very somber event, you know, very good, but somber. And he like bawled, and then we went home, and he was like, I get it, like he was killed, and like he really got it.
Wow.
And just trying to help him process it I don't think there's a guideline for it. I don't think there's a handbook for helping your child who's lost their parent to navigate it. You just do your best with trying to help explain it and keeping it as positive as possible. And that's what my whole goal the whole time is, to be positive when we talk about Blake rather than negative. You know, whenever, like, what our plan is, and I've talked to Jacob about this, and he's obviously on board, but like whenever he graduates high school, like at his graduation, I don't want it to center around Blake's not here. I want it to center around the happiness of the moment. So I'm not gonna be like, oh, this is a great day, Malachi, but, you know, Blake's not here, your dad's not here, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be like, you know what? Your dad's watching you from heaven. He gets to see you graduate from up there, and this is a great, joyous day, and I hope that you enjoy it. We're all enjoying it with you. Like, that is what I plan to continue to have all of these big moments in his life be, which is positive, and just include Blake in a positive way.
That's so good.
Yeah.
And I mean, because it's hard, you know, because you want to keep his memory alive, but you also don't want to make your son's personality is the kid whose dad died, whose dad was shot.
That is a great way of saying it. Yes. I don't want his personality or his identity to be, oh, I'm, you know, the kid that his dad was killed. Like, I never want that to happen. So that's a really good way of saying it.
Yeah. Well, so we're going to talk on a happier note now. That is the next chapter of your life, and which has been meeting your now husband, and finding love again after trauma and tragedy and loss. And, you know, I'm sure there was moments where you were like, I don't even know how that's possible.
Oh, of course not. No. Yeah. There was a long time that I said, I had it the best it was ever going to be. Like, that's how I felt. I was like, no one's going to top Blake, obviously. I guess I'm going to be alone forever. That's kind of how I felt, which made me really sad to think about, too, because I'm not a loner. I've never wanted to be alone or super independent, you know? So during that healing journey and making those choices to be happy again, along with that came with, I'll be open to being in love again. I just don't know when it's going to happen or if it will happen, but I will be open to it. There's a lot of women that are like, absolutely not. Nope. Either they just don't want to, or they feel like it's dishonoring their person, or it's not like, just
like grief just kind of shuts them down. Like, no,
like I can't get out of that place. But I was more of like, I want to be happy again. I know Blake wants me to be happy again. We had that conversation 1 or 2 times that, you know, like, what happens to me, I want you to be happy. Something happens to you, I won't, you know, vice versa. We wanted each other to be happy, and that's who he was. So I had no thoughts in my mind like, oh, he wouldn't like me doing this, because that's not who he was. And I knew him better than anyone, you know? So whenever I met Jacob, at that point in life, I was still like, there's not going to be anyone as good as Blake. So I don't know if it's ever going to happen, you know? Yeah. And then it's like God dropped Jacob in my lap, like very unexpectedly. I met him. He slid into my DMs on Instagram, and really how he tells the story much better than me. But I had posted a picture. It was of my back. It wasn't even my face. I was looking off into like the horizon. It was a pretty background. Mm-hmm. It wasn't even my face, and it came up on his For You page, and he's like, "Oh, that's a pretty sunrise," and he clicked it, and that's how he saw it. And he's like, and then he went to my page, and he's like, "Oh." In his brain, he's like, "Oh, I know who that is." At the time, his brother-in-law was a city detective. So he was kind of in the police family. He knew of it. Yeah. And then his sister was married to a cop, and she knew all about my story and everything. And Jacob's like, "I remember her story happening in 2016. I remember seeing her everywhere." So he was kind of looking at my page, and then the post I had made resonated with his devotional he had that morning. In his Bible, and he's like, "I'm just gonna message her, and I'm gonna send her a picture of my devotional and say, this is what I was reading. It really goes with your picture. I hope you're having a good day." Like, it was really like that. It wasn't like anything else. And he told me, he said, "I did not think you were gonna respond." And I happened to see it, and I was like, "Oh, this is really cool." I responded to the message, and then I looked at his page, and I'm like, this guy's really good looking. Like, that's the first thing that I saw, you know, and it was like, he had a lot of fitness videos up or whatever. And honestly, I was like, this guy's good looking, but his page, I was like, he kind of looks like he'd be a tool. Like, that's what I was like. It was just all like, he was jacked. Like, he was a really good looking guy, and it was all fitness at that point. There was no women on it. There was nothing but fitness and athlete stuff, you know, like, that's all I saw. And his bio had like former Harlem Globetrotter in it, and NCAA dunk contest winner or something like that. And I was like, this guy he might be full of himself, you know, or whatever. But we continued the conversation for a little bit. I think we talked in DMs for like a week or two, and then he finally was like, you know, it'd be really like a lot easier if we just like texted, like, here's my number. And he gave me his number, and I was really interested at this point. Now I'm like, nah, I really like him. We connected. We talked about all kinds of things, from God to kids to just things like in life, you know. And I was a zookeeper at the time, so we were talking about my job. But I purposely waited like 3 hours to text him, and he said it was the hardest 3 hours of his life. That's what he said. He's like, I was so nervous. I didn't know if you were going to text me or not. And it kind of just took off from there. And we had our first date, I want to say 2 weeks after starting to talk. And we met at a park, and we walked this park for 4 hours, and we just talked nonstop about the deepest things in our life. And it just came so easy. And I had such a peace and calm with him that I hadn't really experienced like that before since meeting Blake. And I was like, this just feels right. And after our first date, we literally spent every single day, we didn't miss one day, every single day for 3 months straight together. Like, all day with each other. And then we go home all day with each other for 3 months. And at that point, he proposed. And we knew it. Like, I knew it was time. I just can't explain it. It was a peace that I had never felt before. It was a full when you know moment. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, some people will be like, that's so cliche, or no way that's going to last because you only knew each other 3 months. But we got engaged after 3 months. And after he proposed, I was like, let's get married on Friday. And I was half joking. And he was like, oh, okay. But really, you know, it turned into that. We're like, okay. And we literally went and got married 3 days later. So we got married after only knowing each other for 3 months. And now it's been 5.5-ish years. And I'm happier now than I was that day. Like, it has just gotten better and better with each passing day. He's my best friend. I love him so much. And you could not find a better person to fill the role that I needed filled in my life, meaning helping to take care of Malachi and becoming the father that he was missing out on without Blake here. Not that he was replacing Blake, but more of, I'm going to take on the role of helping raise this child with you because Blake is no longer able to, you know? And it's like he was made for this position in life, which is my helpmate, my supporter, my best friend. And he's just made for it.
Which for sure speaks to his character. And obviously I haven't met him, but because how hard I can imagine it is to, and maybe hard's not the best word, but it's unique to come into a relationship with someone who didn't choose to leave their last relationship.
Right.
You know, like he was coming into a role where he knows that your last husband will always still have a place in your heart,
right,
you know? And so
he is definitely the most secure man I have ever met
in
my life.
Be, I would think,
very secure. And how he has worded it before, and I've quoted him on this, is that he's not in competition with Blake. That's how he sees. Like, I have no competition with Blake. I'm not competing for your heart, because he knows there's one part of my heart that is reserved for Blake, and it always will be. And then the other part of my heart is reserved for him and always will be. Two different loves, two different puzzle pieces that make up my heart, and they fit perfectly. And he knows that. He supports that. We talk about Blake all the time. We talk about my relationship. He knows how much I absolutely still love him, and I love Jacob at the same time. It's just very different. It's a different kind of love. I can love them both at the same time. I can love what I had, and I can love what I have at the same time.
What an amazing way to look at that.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm blessed. I'm very blessed.
You really are.
Not everyone who's lost a spouse is like blessed to this point to where they can find someone so good. Someone that can help you through your grief journey like I have. And Jacob has an amazing relationship with Blake's parents. Like, Blake's parents are at our house once a week watching all of our kids, like my girls and Malachi.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and not everybody's blessed with that either. They are wonderful people as well. So I don't think my life could get better at this point. It's gotten top tier for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was Blake their only child?
No, he has a brother.
Okay.
2 years older.
Okay.
Adam.
But I'm sure they're so grateful to have that connection with you, and of course Malachi for sure.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, that's incredible that you have an incredible story. You really do.
Yes.
So I want to ask you, what does your involvement with law enforcement community look like today? And you also are helping others with their grief and their healing. What does that look like also?
My involvement with law enforcement, so it was a lot more after Blake passed away. I was doing a lot of lobbying for Prop P, which was being passed back then, which would help give more funds to the police, which they need. They will always need more funds. But nowadays, it's more I'm just still connected with all the different events that go on within the department, and within other departments as well, and as well as Backstoppers, which if you're not from the St. Louis area, Backstoppers is an organization that helps families of first responders in their time of need financially, with counseling, all different kinds of things. And they're just an amazing organization. I would not be where I am today without them. So I still play a role with them as well. And then I'm on the executive board for Guns and Hoses. And Guns and Hoses is a big event in St. Louis every year that raises money for Backstoppers and for the families of first responders. And this is our third year straight raising $1 million in one night from Guns and Hoses. Wow. So I'm on the board for that, and that keeps me very involved with everything law enforcement in the area. And yeah, I feel very blessed to still be a part of the Blue family, and I think I'll always be a part of the Blue family for sure.
Oh yeah. And it's such a major part of your life, and so that's incredible that you still do that, and for such a good cause, such good causes too.
100%. And then as far as helping other people, like I said earlier, like I use my platform, to speak about grief and healing and help whoever I can that needs it to navigate those waters that they're going through at the same time. So,
and you also own a fitness, athletic performance facility, and so where you help young athletes on sports skills and performance and everything like that.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about that a little bit, and then also how I know fitness has become a major part of your life with that as well, and I'm sure part of just helping you heal too.
100%. Yeah. Fitness has always been a part of my life. You know, I was heavily involved in sports. I was a gymnast, a cheerleader, competitive cheerleader, volleyball player. I did sports growing up, and then fitness was a really good outlet after I lost Blake to just like for anybody. It's an outlet for a lot of different mental health issues, physical health issues. I really poured into it. But then when I met Jacob, it got even deeper and heavier in the fitness world because he was very much into fitness. You know, he competed in the CrossFit Games in Illinois, and he was a really big basketball star, and he had his own training business when I met him. It was kind of more of like a hobby job when I met him. He was training young athletes, more of like it was just to support him. You know, it was very small. And then we got married, and I quit my job at the zoo so that we could fully open our own training facility, where we went from him having 50 to 80 clients to over 200. So we really turned his hobby into a full-blown business about 4 years ago. And now we get to train young athletes like ages 10 to 22 for athletic performance, which will help them with their skills. But what's really important to me is that we get to pour into these young kids' lives, not just for the court, but off the court. So really, really, really getting a relationship with these young kids and hopefully helping them to build a relationship within the gym setting, you know, the fitness setting, but also help build their character a little bit. It's really, it's a niche, you know, it's a niche that we have, and I really love it. It's very special. You don't find our gym just on every corner, you know, it's not a chain gym. It's our branded gym that we get to help young athletes in.
Yeah. And this is in, you're on the Illinois side, right?
Yeah, we're in Belleville.
Okay.
We're in the Belleville Family Sports Pecs. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because I know I looked into it. I was like, ooh, because my son's almost 10.
Oh, yeah.
He's into football. He wants to get into basketball.
Yeah.
So, you know, Belleville's not that far of a drive. So we'll definitely have to check it out.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
I'm sure he'd love it.
We'd love to have him. Yeah, we're training Malachi. So Malachi is 9, so he's training. And then his cousins who are also 9 and 10, the other one's 11, and they're all training with him too. So it starts out young. If you get them in there and get that foundation built, it can really change who they are going through, you know, middle school, high school, and whatever. It doesn't just help with their skills. It also helps with a lot of life building skills as well.
Oh yeah, like discipline. Discipline is a big
motivation, you know, consistency, all those things.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, how great. And
we love it.
And I love that you have that with your husband, and you guys are, like we were talking right before this, like such a power couple in that business. And
we love it. You know, I could just spend every day, all day with him. We make our own schedules. We make our own pricing. Like, we just love what we get to do. It's really fun. Yeah.
That is great. Well, I'm sure so many listening to this are going to love you and your story and want to follow you on social media now, so if they don't already. And so where are the best places for people to find you, follow you, and check you out?
On Instagram, my Instagram is _Mrs. Tucker, which is Elizabeth Snyder Tucker on Instagram, and then Elizabeth Tucker Snyder on Facebook. So you can find me. I'll show up, I'm sure.
And I can attest, I follow you on Instagram, and everything you post, I'm like, love, love, love.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming again. And of course, you know, being vulnerable, sharing your story. And I know it's not easy to reopen the wound and talk about it. And so I can't thank you enough for being here. And I definitely think that you have helped at least one person on this podcast, and so many more throughout what you're doing on social media.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
As always, I appreciate you all so much for listening. My goal is for these episodes to at least help one person in some aspect of their life. So if you like what you hear, don't forget to follow, like, subscribe to the show, as well as follow us on social media @InsideVoicePod. Thanks.